he had been given the commission of a major general. And so he came up and joined the force that was in the Redoubt. And he didn't serve as an officer. You know, the colonel in command, Colonel Prescott, said, well, I'll yield command to you. You know, I'm a colonel, you're a general. And General Warren said, no, I'm just coming to fight. I'm just a volunteer. I don't want to take command. So there you go. They're the Federals. What am I saying? This is not the Civil War. The Patriots are dug in. Some of them are in a redoubt on top of the hill. Some of them are to the left of the redoubt or to the north of the redoubt, but they are at least behind walls or behind a rail fence that they've stuck extra things in to fortify, and they are ready to go.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up on something that you mentioned 2 episodes ago when you talked about how British soldiers were equipped versus Patriot soldiers, because this is very important as we get into Bunker Hill and the battle itself and what happens. So you did a very good job detailing this and giving the broad strokes, where your average British soldier had the Brown Bess, the musket, and things were much more scattershot and all over the place for Patriot soldiers. You'd have weapons of all types and descriptions. But the difference between the two, and this is important for a charge and an assault, the British had bayonets on their muskets. For the most part, the Patriots did not. A popular firearm that they would have was called the New England Club musket. This is a gun with a heavy buttstock that it was a good counter to Indian tomahawks. So as being part of a defensive home guard against Indian attacks, it served that purpose. But almost nobody had rifles. They also didn't have much reserve ammunition. And the problem is, it's one thing to be short on ammunition, but when you have all sorts of different caliber weapons, you oftentimes can't find the ammunition that you need for your weapon. You have to cast your own musket ball there on the spot. You have to prepare your own cartridge boxes. So before John Stark and his men are dispatched to Breed's Hill in the morning, Stark gives each man a cup of powder, 15 balls, and a flint. Many of these balls didn't fit into the caliber of the weapons the men were carrying, so they had to recast them to their own muskets. And then the men had to make cartridges, which, because they didn't have cartridge boxes, they stuffed into their pocket. This is very ragtag happening behind the walls that they built up. That's what's happening on the Patriot side. What's happening?
Well, let me add one thing too, real quick. I like this story. It's kind of funny. So they had some cannon, not a ton of cannon, but the Patriots did have some cannon inside of the redoubt, and they started to put them into position. They were going to point them in the direction they knew the British would be coming from, which would be from the east. But then they realized they didn't build into the redoubt any slots to put the cannon barrel through, right? So there's no, I don't know what the technical term is for it, but there's no way for them to shoot the cannon through the walls because there's no holes, right? So they just decided, well, let's just make some holes. So they loaded up the cannons and just blasted it right at the wall, and it just punched right through. And so they made their own holes.
Hey, it didn't crumble. Good job, boys. That's good masonry.
Good old American ingenuity. You know, it's like typical military. I shouldn't say that. Forgive me, but typical. You know, we forgot to put the holes in. All right, well, we'll just blast them through. I like that.
Yeah, that sounds like that ad hoc thing. It sounds like what Russians would do at the siege of Leningrad, but necessity is the mother of invention. All right, the British.
All right, so the British.
What's their plan?
They're going to challenge this reinforcement. They know that the Patriots have put a bunch of men up on Breed's Hill, and they didn't know the redoubt was going to be built, but it was mainly built overnight. So they woke up the next day, and lo and behold, oh, look, great, it's a redoubt. So they've got to challenge that. So General Gage, he called a council of his senior commanders, and we may remember that last time we talked about 3 other generals had been sent over, major generals. That's a 2-star, at least, well, in today's army, it's a 2-star general. Gage was a lieutenant general, which is the equivalent of a 3-star general. So he's the head honcho. But these other guys are under him. He's got Henry Clinton, he's got John Burgoyne, and he's got William Howe, and all those are going to have a big future. We will have a lot to say about every one of them. So he gets them to give their advice. Clinton wanted to seize the neck of the peninsula. In other words, he said, let's go land troops right at the neck and cut these guys off from behind. Okay. And that way, if you think of the I'm going to change analogies here, Scott, but if you think of the Charlestown Peninsula as a bottle, this would be the neck. And if we cut that off, then the guys in the bottle are going to be stuck. But Gage said, no, we don't want to do that. What if they send over more guys from the mainland? You'll be putting yourself between two groups of rebel or patriot soldiers. They obviously, the British didn't call them patriots. They called them rebels. But so Gage doesn't want to do that. And General Howe says, let's land people and some Marines too, Semper Fi, on the Charlestown Peninsula. In other words, let's do the amphibious assault. Let's land on the far end, meaning the east end. And then let's just march up there from behind on the Redoubt. In other words, Howe wanted to do one of those famous flanking movements that Scott loves so much.
Oh, yeah. Battle of Cannae, Khalid ibn al-Walid, so many in history to choose from.
Absolutely, yeah, and these guys had read about them. Let's go around the Redoubt. Instead of hitting it head on, let's go around it and let's hit it from behind as well as from the front, and we'll just completely cut off the Americans and surround them. Gage said, okay, I like that idea. So he agrees to that, and he wanted to show, Gage didn't want to just capture the Redoubt and capture the peninsula. He wanted to send a message to the Americans. He wanted to show that no mere, dirty, poor, unprofessional American militiamen could resist British regulars. We're professional soldiers. You guys are amateurs. You guys are a bunch of farmers with guns. He wanted to show them who was boss and to strike fear into their hearts. So what if they're inside of a fortification? No big deal. We'll go through it.
Yeah, and this is an attitude that, looking back in history, we can fault the British for, of underestimating the Patriots. It's easy, I think, to be an armchair general and say, oh, he was egotistical. His hubris got the best of him. He overruled Clinton, who wanted to dig in. I can sort of see where Gage is going, because a siege is hard work. To lay the entire peninsula to siege, you could be attacked on both sides. Many times it's just as hard laying the siege as it is being under siege itself. But at the same time, this lesson in history of not underestimating your opponent goes all the way back to Sun Tzu. And this is it in spades, where it's not just the strategy of flanking them. And I respect a good flank. You mentioned all these people, and you know who else liked flanking? Napoleon. So I respect that. But then digging deeper into the strategy, there wasn't really any complicated maneuvering once they did this flanking maneuver. They thought, well, we'll charge the hill. The slope is gentle. If we have a determined assault and then bayonet them, we're going to capture the fort. This idea of Gage is that this will demonstrate that the British Army can crush any rebel insurrection. Some may have even thought the Americans were cowards, and all they had to do was just chase them down when they went into a full rout.
Yeah, they'll break and run.
Right. And this same attitude, it's repeated other times in the war. Well, we saw it with Lexington and Concord, and this cripples British generals throughout the war. I mean, on the one hand, I get that if you're running a colonial empire all around the world and you have limited troops you can send abroad, you really want to crush uprisings ruthlessly to send a message elsewhere. But this idea of underestimating your opponent, it's one thing at the beginning of the war, but this seems to persist. And it's one of the things that cripples the British war machine, or not the war machine, but the leadership. So I sympathize with the troops on the ground who had to keep following these orders that get them blundering into bad situations. It's almost like Confederate generals that get a little bit intoxicated on the spirit of Johnny Reb and the chivalric spirit that will allow them to overcome any odds and anything else. Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors.
Yeah, one rebel is as good as 10 Yankees. Yeah, that turned out to not be the case. All right, so the British begin to get ready. They start loading up the soldiers into boats on the docks of Boston. Around 2 p.m., or actually it was at before 2 p.m., they started moving over. By 2 p.m., the last of about 1,600 British troops landed on the peninsula at Moulton's Point, which is the southeast corner of the peninsula. Now, while this is going on, or I should say, it's not southeast. I'm sorry. It's just like east. It's one of the angles of the triangle, if you will. So, but as they're landing, snipers in Charlestown, which again, that's on the right angle. It's the part closest to Boston. Snipers in Charlestown are starting to fire at some of these soldiers. And so the British realize, well, we got to get rid of these snipers. We can't do an attack if people are picking off a bunch of our guys. So some of the British ships that were in the Charles River began firing away on Charlestown. So they blast away at the town, and most of the things catch on fire. Most of the buildings are made out of wood, and pretty soon the entire town is in flames. And so keep that in mind as we talk about the battle and next time, that there's smoke everywhere and it's really creating chaos, fire and smoke, and it's adding to the heat. It's already a very hot day. And so that's going to make things really interesting. Before the British actually start the assault on the Redoubt and on the other American lines, Howe realizes that he needs more soldiers. So he summons about 700 more reinforcements from Boston. And he had the original force rest until reinforcements could arrive. And that gave the Americans a little bit more time to prepare, or the Patriots. So there you go. That's where we stand right before the attack. The British are lining up, getting ready, and the Americans are getting ready as well.
So let's give the British command credit here. They're not repeating the mistakes of Lexington and Concord. They're having troops that are well rested and in good number so they can accomplish the task. So, hey, let's give them that, right?
Right. Definitely don't want to make that mistake again.
Yes, they narrowly avoided disaster. If it weren't for poor Patriot marksmanship and disorganization, then Lexington and Concord could have been a lot uglier for the British. But we are going to get into the thick of Bunker Hill. But this is such a big topic. We can't put this in one episode. And what we have to do is leave this with a cliffhanger, like any good two-parter, but we're not going to do Dallas in the 1980s of Who Shot JR and have you wait the entire summer. If you're listening to this digitally, it's probably just the next episode over. So we are going to pick up in the next episode and see what happens when we get into the Battle of Bunker Hill. See you then. So that is the episode for today. As always, I want to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, especially our spy masters, Todd Warren, Jake Harrington, Beverly Engel, Bill Ivey, Joyce Norman, Tyler from Colorado, Josh Reddick, Baron Fraser, Chris from Maine, Carl from Norway, Moondoggy from Ohio, Rick Knowlton, Vic and Irene, Mike from New York, Michelle, and Marlene. I'll explain what that is in a second. If you like the show and want to help it grow, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, like and subscribe to the show on the podcast player of your choice. This helps spread the word about the show. 2, join our Facebook group. Here we can keep the discussion going about new episodes, and you can talk about what you like and didn't like. And you can find this group if you just search for History Unplugged on Facebook. 3, we have an online store with t-shirts, phone covers, and other accessories featuring awesomely bad history puns that were crowdsourced by you, the audience. And you can find that if you go to public.com and look for History Unplugged, or you just go to historyonthenet.com and look for our store there. 4, and this is really the best way to dive deep with History Unplugged, and that's to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you know your American history, you know the Knowlton's Rangers were an elite spy and reconnaissance group in the American Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the membership program of History Unplugged. You can join at 3 levels. If you join at the level of Scout, you can hear all the episodes of History Unplugged completely ad-free and get early access to new episodes, at least a week early. If you join at the Intelligence Officer level, you get special bonus episodes, like a 10-part series on the World War II hero Audie Murphy, a multi-part series called Ottoman Lives about different people in the Ottoman Empire, and a series called Rendezvous with Death that looks at biographical profiles of Americans who went to fight in World War I before America entered the war. The last level is Spy Master, where you get all that stuff, but you also get 3 hardcover history books, Forging a President, How the Wild West Created Teddy Roosevelt, Race to the Top of the World, Richard Byrd and the First Flight to the North Pole, and The Last Fighter Pilot, the true story of the final combat mission of World War II. Another bonus is, you can choose a history topic for me to focus on for an entire episode that can go up to an hour, and I'll answer whatever question you have for me, and you get a shout out at the end of each episode. If you want to learn how to become a member of the Knowlton's Rangers, go to patreon.com/unplugged. That's patreon.com/unplugged. All right, well, that is all for my spiel. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast, from ancient Greece to the Cold War and everything else in between. See you next time.